the gap in our poll being closed, it's not really shifting for the Conservatives, is it?
And normally, if you talk to polling experts, whoever the governing party is, it begins to narrow.
Does it?
Yeah.
Normally.
It normally does. Well, we've had 3 or 4 weeks of this, and there's been really no movement at all. In fact, because of reform, the Tories have probably gone back.
I keep thinking it will. Right, and it hasn't
because conventionally it does.
What's happened in the past. I keep thinking this will happen.
In 2015, it was all in the last week to 10 days, wasn't it?
I still think it will. I still think it will. I think, look, Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister, Labour are going to be in government, there'll be a majority, but I just don't think the Tories will be wiped out in Extinction Rebellion, 72 seats or anything like that. But that split on the right is there. It's fundamental now between Reform UK on the hard right, the Conservative Party just on the right, and that's going away, and that's a gift for Labour because again you just go back.
Well, your poll has shown that.
Starmer can get fewer votes
and Reform UK are up at the
2017.
equivalent amount. What's interesting, though, is that the poll done by Survation for Good Morning Britain suggests that Labour are more trusted on tax than the Conservatives. And this is despite a relentless assault by the Tories on Labour's tax plans. And the front of the Times this morning says that Starmer is going to threaten savers with a chequebook over tax plans. And this goes back to a LBC phone-in interview yesterday that the Labour leader did with Nick Ferrari, when he was asked repeatedly about taxes for working people, because the Labour Party want to put out this idea, we're not going to tax working people. Now, everybody in work thinks that they're a working person. So who is he defining as working, and therefore who is safe from not being given extra tax, and who is not safe? Let's have a listen to what he said. Interesting.
Well, I think it's staggering.
So Simon Cowell does not count as a working person because in an emergency he could write a cheque. But so that means Sir Keir Starmer doesn't count as a working person
because he can write a cheque.
He could write a cheque.
Because he's got a good income, and so is his wife, who works in the NHS. He's basically saying, if you've got some money in the bank, we could come after you.
He's not basically saying.
Yes, he is.
Waffling.
Yes, he
there are 8 million. There are 8 million. There are 8 million. Sorry, I'm going to bring some facts in here.
Also,
there are 8 million.
We just heard him. There are 8 million. Why are you saying bringing facts? We just heard him, Maguire. Look, did you not hear him? Are you going deaf?
Can we?
Are you going deaf? Sorry, can I just?
Are we going to have some light or just noise?
Yeah,
are we going to have some light or noise?
People who can't write a cheque.
Are
we? Write a cheque. That means people who have got savings.
Kevin, could you write a cheque in an emergency?
Yeah, I could, yes.
OK, so...
You as well.
I know, but I...
so you're not a working person, according to Labour leader's definition.
There are 8 million people in Britain who have no savings. I think there were, the last figures I saw, 21 million people who don't have savings over £1,500. So if you need a new car or you have a disaster at home, you would be in trouble. You might say you could write a cheque, but you can't write a cheque for very much. Now, I think he was waffling, Starmer. I heard the entire interview,
out the bag.
And even you don't believe that.
Cat's out the bag.
Look, he's got his red Labour tie on now. Even he's given up.
Cat's out the bag.
But Kevin, it's significant, isn't it?
How significant?
Because people who are going to vote want to know whether they're going to face taxes. And I think a lot of people would be perfectly prepared to pay more tax if they're able to. But the problem that Sir Keir Starmer faces is that people are worried whether he is being transparent about who is going to face more tax. And he said no increase in tax on working people. And now we know that he means working people who don't have savings are the ones who are not going to be taxed. But if you've got savings, you are likely to.
Cat's out the bag.
But we know...
Kevin, you have the stage.
But we know, if we swallow the Tory propaganda as we're getting here...
we just heard him.
That would be the case. What he's done is he's gone... trying not to answer questions, as he did on has Israel committed genocide or not.
It was a gaffe, wasn't it?
It was a gaffe. It was definitely a gaffe. But you do not hang everything on that. Otherwise, where would we be in a campaign? I mean, that's it.
But isn't it a symptom of Keir Starmer? He's somebody who, I mean, it's been a Labour campaign which is very cautious, very careful, very controlled. They have this language about, well, you know, we're not going to raise taxes on working people. It's all in the manifesto. But people are thinking, I know, but is that really all of it? So everybody's looking for clues.
But it won't be all
when
of
he
it.
says this, people think, so actually, is he telling us something here? We all know that people in their 50s, as they move towards retirement, are more likely to, at that point, have some savings in their life. Is Keir Starmer saying, when I say taxes won't rise on working people, I'm talking about people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, but if you're on your 50s into your 60s, you are fair game. It is a legitimate thing for people to ask that question.
It is.
If he says that on the interview...
But Ed, why do you say it's a gaffe? Perhaps he's finally telling the truth.
Well,
finally telling the truth.
Well,
if you've got savings, you're going to have to pay more taxes.
I mean a gaffe.
Finally,
I mean a gaffe in the sense that his campaign people will all be saying,
oh
sure. My God, why has he said that? Shouldn't have said that.
I listened to that, and it was rather like in the head-to-head with Sunak, when he says he's now frustrated, he didn't answer on the 2000 tax lie. I was listening, I'm thinking, you don't really think this. Why don't you
Maybe he does.
He doesn't. I mean...
Doesn't he?
Look...
Well, why did he say it?
I would abolish capital gains tax and make it the same as income tax, just merge the taxes. He's not going to do that. But there will, no doubt, there will be some taxes around, for instance, capital gains, maybe changing the allowances, maybe changing the rates, changing who can claim it. That will be the area. But on income tax, VAT and national insurance as it is now, he's in the same position.
He's been found
as
out.
The Tories.
Let's see if he clarifies it today. Let's see if they clarify it today.
You put tax...
Let's see if they clarify it today.
You put
it's in the horse's mouth, Kevin. You heard him say
He was asked for a definition and he gave one.
And he gave
he gave one. And I bet he will change it.
And he didn't then correct himself in the interview. He was in that studio for over half an hour. He had plenty of time to correct himself. He didn't.
Honestly, though, I don't think in his mind he was even thinking what the headlines were going to be, what it was going to mean. I think he was extemporising.
He finally told the truth, perhaps, Ed.
Well, he was trying to get through the interview without saying anything, and in the end, he said something. And this is
extraordinary admission.
Look,
the leader of the opposition, who's 2 weeks away from an election, Kevin says he was trying not to say anything.
Look, there was no...
You go on a phone-in.
We're not going to get any understanding.
Hang on, Kevin. You go in on a phone-in for half an hour, and Kevin says he was trying not to say anything. What a shocking admission.
Look, can you just zip it for a minute? It is the
a bit like
problem.
Try not to say anything.
Right,
zip it.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you to zip it for a minute because Kevin's getting frustrated.
We all thought the red tie was meaning something today, and it turns out to be a false flag.
And this is what I find incredibly dispiriting about election campaigns, because both sides just want to always point at the other side. Not what they're going to do, and we don't really get the truth from either side, and because Keir Starmer says, I got no magic wand. It's true he hasn't, but he's going to have to be a magician to make his tax and spending plans add up when he's put himself into a straitjacket. He is pushing away taxation because there's no honesty on it. And the Conservatives have done the same, which is why we had taxes go up to a 70-year high, and then they have the cheek, the chutzpah, to then say, you're going to do this, when you can say, look at your record, which is why I think your poll and other polls show Labour trust people on tax, not the Conservatives, because the Conservatives have got a record they cannot defend.
Another way to say it would be the Conservatives are even less trusted on tax than Labour because of the scale of the tax rises we've seen over the last few years. But I wouldn't think if you were Labour, you'd look at these polls and think, we're trusted on tax. No. You would think to yourself, this is all...
Tactically...
It's a plague on both the houses, your poll. It really is.
Tactically, strategically in an election, it's like Labour's now better trusted on immigration. And I think that's because, again, the Tories have a record. They can't defend that. You can go at the height of free movement under Tony Blair, 2005, I think it was, and net migration now is more than double that. They sold Rwanda for 2 years as the solution, but people have seen through it and know it's just an expensive waste of money. And
I'll tell you somebody who could write a cheque in an emergency, and that is the billionaire John Caldwell. He used to be a backer of the Conservatives. He gave $500,000 before the last general election. The reason he's a billionaire, he's the founder of Phones for You. And he has changed his mind. Let's have a listen. Wow, that's quite an endorsement.
He's been pretty critical for a long time now, the Tories, actually. He gave money during Boris's time. But, yeah, I mean, he's a big businessman, and the Tories used to have big business backing them, but a lot of them have vanished. Because, a lot of it is to do with tax. Caldwell is quite interesting because he's the one, I think he's had Ukrainian families living on his estate. He is an interesting figure.
I get a bit queasy when people like him back Labour. I think it was back in 29. He said he'd leave Britain if Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister. I think
a lot of people had that.
He talked about, and I'm pretty certain he used the phrase raped. He meant financially taxed, which I thought was absolutely horrific. But there's no doubt if you're Labour and you're positioning yourself as a party that can be trusted on growth, the economy, tax, then you get somebody like that, you're going to parade them. And it'll just undermine Conservative confidence because they will all think somebody like that, a buccaneer, an entrepreneur at the sharp end. And again, I'm very queasy about him backing Labour and what does that mean about Labour's policies. But it's a big blow for the Tories.
It is. What about yesterday's photo opportunities for the Prime Minister? So, Rishi
I think he needs better advice, don't you?
Or else he's just leaning into it now. His first stop yesterday was Clovelly, which is located in Torridge and Tavistock, which is a very safe Conservative seat. I didn't know there were such places as Clovelly. It's a privately owned village and it charges you £10 to enter. And off he went there and...
Sorry.
Yeah.
It charges you £10 as an ordinary person just to go into
Apparently.
it. Is it a theme park?
It sounds like it.
Is it, I mean...
Keeps out the yikes. Keeps out those who can't write a cheque.
They charge people to go into the village.
Apparently so. £10.
Can you imagine being the butcher or the baker
balls.
or the ice cream seller in that shop, in that village? It must be
Maybe they get a pass.
He took a trip out on a fishing boat to look at lobster pots before returning to shore. And he headed inland to meet farmers where he struggled to feed a flock of sheep alongside the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron. I mean, there he is. He's throwing out policies and the sheep are running away from him. It just feels like a metaphor, doesn't it?
I know. They've legged it.
And on the boat, you think, look, he's all at sea, he's sinking, he's adrift, he's about to be capsized.
That day, by the way, that there is a very telling... that sheep photo is a very telling photo. David Cameron and Rishi Sunak are on this visit. David Cameron realises the sheep are not being friendly. He pulls back to the side and allows Rishi Sunak to go and try and lure the sheep.
And takes the entire photo opportunity.
Where is David Cameron in the photo? He's on the visit. Yeah. Normally, if you're on the visit, you're in the photo.
Of course you are.
David Cameron has run a mile.
The Labour double agent in Tory HQ is working overtime, after drowning
As for the boat picture,
streets,
I mean, golden rule in
Titanic.
Golden rule in politics, never allow the Prime Minister or the Chancellor to stand alone on a boat.
Yeah.
Because it never looks good.
No.
Always say
Captain of a sinking ship, all the analysis.
Showbiz never children and animals, and he's there. But you know what's most significant is he is, as you say, Susanna, in what was a very safe Tory seat. It shows you it's now all defensive, trying to stop losing even what were safe seats. He hasn't even gone to a Tory marginal because he knows they've gone. And so he's going there, and it's all about trying to make the defeat not as devastating as it looks at the moment.
I'm still not totally sure. So, Kevin, you said a moment ago you thought the polls could narrow. They usually narrow, not going to be a big majority. What is the thing in these final 2 weeks? Because we're talking here about, not working on tax, these first opportunities. What can happen in the final week or so to bring the polls back together?
The Tories will hope the suggestion that Labour are going to have a supermajority will spook people because people don't want governments with 250 majorities. They want a viable opposition. And if the Tories are down to 70 seats, there won't be a viable opposition. And I think that could scare people into sticking with the Tories.
Attack?
And I think that it will keep sinking through. And if Starmer keeps admitting the truth about, if you've got savings, you're going to pay more tax, mate, that will help.
I don't think he said that, but nevertheless...
I'm also not totally sure that the exposure for Nigel Farage is going to help him.
Well, not after yesterday.
I think he had a tough time yesterday.
Well, I think, it's legitimate, just as it is with Starmer and Sunak, or Ed Davey, or the Scott Nats, or Plaid, the Greens, or Northern Ireland's Party, anybody who's standing to ask them questions and expect an answer. And he didn't like that yesterday, Nigel Farage, because he's not really across policies like that. He's all about big, broad strokes to whip people up with a sense of grievance. People have a lot of grievances, legitimate grievances, and then when he's drilled down on the policy, he didn't like it. But I agree. Look, Labour's cautious, trying not to lose it, so you'll get chipped away a bit. But I think that concern... I mean, I'm not sure myself that big majorities are good in the democracy.
Let's just talk about Reform UK, because you're referring to an interview that we did with the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, yesterday on the programme. Ed was grilling him on his tax plans. He wants to raise the threshold for those at the lower end of income, give them more of their money tax-free. And I was grilling him on the quality of his candidates. And he defended 41 candidates found to be social media friends of a fascist leader. Now, Nigel Farage said yesterday that there was a problem with vetting and the vetting company. Let's have a listen.
Story coming out at lunchtime today where you'll hear that we paid a very large sum of money to a reputable vetting company who didn't do the work. So, yes, we've got one or two problems.
OK,
but people liking each other on Facebook, I'm sorry, I just don't take that seriously.
Now he's claiming that the political party is the victim of an establishment stitch-up. So it was vetting.com. And Mr Farage said it's an establishment stitch-up. The owner of the vetting company has deep links to the Tory party, and they have some serious questions to answer.
It's a conspiracy too far, I'm afraid.
So, the vetting.com that say, in answer to the questions, everyone's working assumption was that the election would be in the autumn, giving us the summer to complete this work.
Right.
Given the explicit need for candidate consent, as well as our systems needing basic personal data like dates of birth, our automated software was not able to process Reform's candidates with the data that was provided when it was provided. Basically, they ran out of time to work out if these were...
And it was one of the reasons Sunak went for an early election, was he knew that Reform weren't ready, didn't have the money, didn't have the organisation. He thought Farage wouldn't run as an MP, and that was a key reason why they went early. And it backfired in one respect, because, of course, Farage is running. But Reform have been caught napping with some of these candidates who were shockers.
Infamy, they've all got it in for me. But he does, he's always got to be the victim. But I just go back to, you've got to wonder, if you're Nigel Farage, why have you attracted all these people who want to be your candidates, who think Britain shouldn't have entered the Second World War, shouldn't have fought the Nazis?
Shouldn't have fought the
why
Nazis.
You do not want people like that. And
someone who urged people to vote for the BNP, a candidate who had described Adolf Hitler as brilliant.
Yeah. If he wants to know why he's got all these people, I think he just has to look in the mirror. You don't have to employ a vetting company, just looks in the mirror and he will see. And he won't like that, but that's what it is. He's going around stirring up prejudice and hatred. Well,
he said he wouldn't say that he was proud of the candidates. He said that he disagreed with all of these views.
Just as well.
Yeah, exactly, just as well.
When he does his patriotic curriculum in schools and you have somebody saying we shouldn't have fought the Nazis, but all these people enjoying fascists and backing them, that doesn't sound very patriotic to me.
But it is a different strategy for Nigel Farage, and that is what will be tested in the next 2 weeks. You know, he could have decided to have 10 or 15 candidates in winnable seats. But they decided, you know, we want to fight loads of seats. He could have said, you know, my slogan is get Brexit done, or get migration down. Instead, he decides to come along with a manifesto with policies on the National Health Service and taxation and education. And if you're a political leader and you come and do an interview, you can't say, I don't want to talk about that, I want to talk about something else. It's your manifesto. He thought, I think, that his tax policies was helping people on the lowest incomes. He was quite surprised, I think, to find out that people on the highest incomes get a bigger gain from his tax policy than people on middle and lower incomes. I mean, you know, there'll be some people who will say, well, that isn't a surprise. I thought Nigel Farage was quite surprised by that.
Yeah. And your poll suggests, I think, there'd be about 3 Reform MPs. And, of course, if they had just fought in a few concentrated seats, they could fight a better campaign.
Without all of these problems on campus.
But he wants to be taken serious as a national party because his plan is, after the election, to realign on the right, so he's got to show that he can fight a national campaign.
It's all about smashing the Conservative Party to then get what he calls his bridgehead of a few Reform MPs in Parliament, and then you either take over the Conservative Party or you become an alternative. Very difficult under the electoral system we have, because Reform's MPs will not reflect their share of the vote. But that's why he's got all these candidates. He just needs paper candidates.
But his party is the one that's going up in the polls throughout the campaign. Labour's gone down a bit, the Tories have gone down. His party's going up.
The only way it's going to narrow in the final 2 weeks if that reverses. The only way in which the gap closes and the majority is smaller is not just if people start switching from Labour back to the Conservatives, but more importantly,
Reform.
That Reform voters think, actually, I'd rather vote Tories, or if undecided Tories who might not vote decide to come out. So the scrutiny on Reform in these final 2 weeks is hugely important for the Conservatives.
But if you get if the Conservatives get a couple of percent from Labour, you know, people who were Tories got to Labour, but then they think, I'll just go home to the Tory party. And they get several percent from Reform, then they'll avoid a wipe out, but it won't change the result, in the sense that what really matters is who is going to be in government and power.
It could change the majority massively.
Yes.
I mean, it's actually a few percentage points in these polls can make the difference with a majority of 50 or of 200.
250.
You know, we saw with Labour in 2015 in Scotland a couple of percentage points, and suddenly you go from having loads of Labour MPs to basically almost not one, because the SNP surged. So these little changes in these polls can have a massive impact.
I still wonder if Labour's majority will be 40 to 60, which is still a remarkable achievement if that should happen, because Starmer inherited Labour in 2019 with the fewest MPs it had since 1935, only 202.
I'll tell you something that is still going up, and that is the cost of living. And it's the biggest issue for voters, and the inflation figures come out in a couple of minutes. And as people, are pointing out, even if the inflation rate comes down, prices are still going up.
Yeah, they're just going up, not as fast.
Yeah.
But this is a big moment for the Tories, because he had his 5 targets, one of which was to get inflation down to 2%. If he's got it, he can at least say, I've got one.
Well, I think he wanted to halve inflation, and he already achieved that.
Yeah.
But yes, the target figure is 2%.
And that would be a big boost.
Yeah.
And that is a sign that the economy is improving.
And what I'd like is the Bank of England to cut interest rates. But my guess is they will decide that doing that in an election campaign is just too
political.
Too political.
Yeah. The other economic figures the figures that have come out during the campaign have not helped him. Zero growth in a month. Unemployment went up, employment came down, long-term sickness, I think, went up. NHS waiting lists, there was another little up. But this is the one he looks for. But all those other price increases that we've had are all baked in. So inflation goes up 2%. Prices are still going up. You're not getting back everything you've lost. That's it.
Right.
But it'll be
gone.
It'll be one of the best inflation figures in Europe, and they'll be shouting it from the rooftops today.
Yeah, lovely.
People won't
not lovely, but lovely to see you.
We'll see you shortly.
We will see you shortly.